Welcome to the Emotionally Healthy Leader Podcast. My name is Rich Villodas. I'm the lead pastor of New Life Fellowship Church here in Queens, New York City. And I'm here with Pete Scazzero. Pete is the founder of New Life Fellowship, as well as the founder of Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And we've been on a series of podcasts looking at different themes from the book, The Emotionally Healthy Leader. And we've covered things like slowing down for loving union. We've covered things like leading out of your marriage or out of your singleness. Today we're talking about practicing Sabbath delight. Practicing Sabbath delight. The Sabbath delight has been a life changer and a life preserver for me and our family as we have been in leadership. And Pete, this has been a theme that when we do conferences and what have you, something happens in people when we talk about practicing Sabbath. Those three words, though, practice, Sabbath, delight. Can you just unpack each word there before we go into some of the qualities of the Sabbath?
Yeah, I think practice, one is, I think we want people to actually do it. I mean, as you know, many of us can preach it, teach it, talk about it. Doing it consistently, where there's a rhythm in my life of work and Sabbath, that is the goal. And that's the life-transforming practice. Secondly, it's Sabbath, and we'll define Sabbath in just a few minutes. I actually take a 24-hour period where I Sabbath to the Lord our God. And thirdly, practice Sabbath delight.
Why'd you put that word there?
Yeah, delight's the key word. I think delight, there's many aspects of Sabbath, but delight is the core of Sabbath, where God delights in the very first Sabbath. He goes, this is very good. And really in the original Hebrew, one of my Old Testament prophets said, it's like saying, this is spectacular, this is wonderful, this is awesome. It's just an expression of beaming with delight. And we are so delight deficient in among the leaders and pastors and churches that we associate delight with sin. And yet God is the author of delight. He's created this beautiful, wonderful universe, and He gave us 5 senses. And we are to delight in the world. We are to delight in so many things, creation. It's all given to us as a gift. And Sabbath says, Jesus says, you were not made for Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for you. It's a gift. And so if we miss delight, it becomes blue laws, legalism, bondage, and heavy, like, it's a have to and a should.
Yeah.
But Sabbath, if you really taste the inside of Sabbath, it is pure joy.
So there are many wonderful definitions about what the Sabbath, how people have unpacked it. You've landed on a very simple definition about the Sabbath. How would you define what is Sabbath keeping?
So just a little history. In 1996, I began experimenting with Sabbath, reading stuff on it. And so I had moderate success, up, on, off, starts and stops. But then in 2003, after our contemplative sabbatical, I said, this is a critical discipline, and I got to get this thing down. And I got to somehow bring it to our church. So I read everything I could, written by evangelicals out there on Sabbath. I got into Jewish writings, but I immersed myself, and I basically simplified it to 4 basic principles, or 4 words that we could use to create a container for our Sabbaths. One is stop our work, paid and unpaid, rest, do things that give us rest, delight, and then contemplate. By contemplate, referring to seeing the invisible God and all of the gifts of the visible creation. And that those 4 provided a kind of a framework on which each person, depending on your temperament, your personality, your life situation, your age, all that, you could construct a Sabbath around these principles that would get at the heart of Sabbath, not just the exterior practice.
So we'll unpack those in a moment here. Why is it so difficult for people for leaders specifically, to consider practicing the Sabbath? For many people that we talk to, it almost seems like an impossibility to do this.
Well, and it's interesting because I think as we've been in it now since 2003, I think in the last couple of years, it's become clear as we've brought this around the country and the world, because I would observe that we would do a Sabbath at pastors and leaders conferences. It was almost like a power and principality got confronted. And it was so powerful. I remember we would talk about, what is it? What is it about Sabbath that it's like people just get delivered? And Walter Brueggemann wrote a book on that very theme. And it all just came together for me on how in the Deuteronomy command, when God says, He invites us to Sabbath, and then he says, you're no longer slaves in Egypt. And he bases it on the fact that they were slaves for 400 years under Pharaoh, but now you've been set free. And free people, as you like to say, can rest.
Yeah.
And you got to imagine, people don't, so it's so difficult because for 400 years, their entire identity was in what they did, was in work. Our whole culture is built on what do you do, is work. So it's in our bones. Jesus in your heart, grandpa's in your bones, Pharaoh's in our bones. And so when we talk about we have been set free from the evil one. And Pharaoh was considered a god in ancient times. And behind Pharaoh were demonic powers, keeping the people of God enslaved. In the same way, there are demonic powers and principalities that want to keep us enslaved, especially leaders. How are we going to set other people free if we're not free? And so Sabbath is a declaration that I'm a free man, I'm a free woman. And I belong to God. My identity is not in the size of my church. My identity is not in what people think of me. My identity is not in my work, although I love work and work is good. My identity is in the living God who loves me apart from my performance. So there is something, as we engage in Sabbath, we tap into, I think, powers and principalities. We tap into significant shadows.
Yeah.
I think that's why I think it's such a large discipleship issue, and it takes a while to figure it out. But if we can get it right, that it's not legalism and it's not licentiousness where it's irrelevant, but it's a spiritual formation practice, and we can help people get that, it is so freeing and liberating.
So you mentioned Brueggemann. Brueggemann talks about Sabbath as, so all you're talking about resistance, so resisting the powers, the principalities. You also talk about, though, Sabbath as revelation. Like there's something, what do you mean by that? That when we practice Sabbath the light, it's not just about resistance, it's about revelation.
You know, we learn about God in so many ways, right? We learn about God through Scripture, obviously, and creation and suffering and relationships. But there is a revelation about God that comes in Sabbath. There are things that God can speak and impart to us that can only happen in Sabbath. For example, I think for myself, I can think of a couple things I've learned about God works when I'm sleeping, Psalm 127, Psalm 121, that I wake up and God's working. You see, when Jesus says, my Father's working to this very day and I too am working, that's when the Pharisees accused him of blasphemy in John chapter 5, because he was claiming to be God. The Hebrews understood the only person who works 7 days a week is God. People are being born, people are dying. God's keeping the universe moving. God's working on Sabbath, but we are not God. We are humans. And so we are not to work on Sabbath. We're to rest in the Lord our God. And so, I forgot your question though.
So revelation. So there's
revelation. There's a revelation about God being on a throne, and truths when we stop and rest. It's almost like the soil. Remember, God every 7 years would have the soil was not to be worked. It was to be fallow. And because God would be instilling nutrients into the soil in that year. In the same way, when we rest and Sabbath, God is putting things in us that we can't even see it. Things are getting into our soil that otherwise just can't get in there.
So there is in delight. So those four things. So when we stop, there's something of revelation. God reveals himself somehow when we stop. When we're resting, he reveals himself. When we're delighting, playing, he's revealing himself to us. When we're contemplating, seeing the visible, the invisible in the visible, there's revelation for us, and we're missing most of it.
Absolutely, because we're working for God.
It's really crazy to think about. We're missing all of this revelation from God. So a leader that's listening to this and watching this right now, they're probably working 80 hours a week, let's say, and working 6.5, 7 days a week, starting the Sabbath. Pete, 400 years, the people of God were in slavery. I imagine that when Moses said, okay, everybody, today's a Sabbath, it's hard for me to believe that they got it just like that. And so it's hard for me to believe as well that folks that have been working for years, decades, families, generations are just going to get the Sabbath just like that. So what words of encouragement can you give to folks that are thinking about practicing Sabbath the light? They realize, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I'm irritable, I'm moody. This is being transmitted to the people that I'm close to. What words of encouragement would you give to those thinking about experimenting with Sabbath?
We need an hour, you know that. But I would say that in simple, one, if you have a day off, which is probably Monday for many pastors and leaders, I would transform that day off into a Sabbath to the Lord our God. And I'd begin to work with that because that's easy. Or it may be that your life is so busy and out of control, you might want to start with 12 hours and then build up. But a Sabbath is a 24-hour period that you want to move up to. I would say that's number one. I would say start with some simple wins. Secondly is you want to figure out, how can I create a container that fits for me? Now, again, the Israelites didn't learn it overnight, right? I mean, if you look at Scripture, it's clear it took a long time for them to figure out Sabbath. So give yourself a lot of grace to figure this out. What's going to work for you? Because what's worked for you might not be work for somebody else. Yeah. And because we're all built differently. So it's going to take a lot of trial and error, and you're going to want to find, if possible, some support along the way. But I like the word container, and this fellow's mentioned in the book, Todd Deathridge, and he's got a ministry out there in the Mideast. And he learned from the Jewish rabbis in Jerusalem about Sabbath, which is they create this, it looks like a legalistic container, but for them it's not legalistic from the inside. And when he would participate with them in Sabbaths, he realized, oh my gosh, this is like, wow. Because you couldn't drive, you could do this, but for them the day has to be a different kind of a day.
It's protected.
Protected. So you got to figure out what's going to protect it for you, the beauty of Sabbath. And so for some it might be no technology, might be, I know for me, I don't do, and we don't tweet or blog or do social media. I rest from my paid and unpaid work. And so I work hard to say, how's this day going to be different than my other 6 days? And then I think through delight. Now, Jerry and I, we do it often, you and Rosie do, which is we'll light a candle.
Yeah.
We'll do something to mark the day, to have a beginning. And again, there's so much to learn from the Jewish community, the Hasidics and other Orthodox Jews, because they've been doing this for 3,500 years. So they got a lot more on us. And having a starting moment and an ending moment. And so I would encourage you to take some first steps. And we have found in our journey here at New Life that legalism has not been a problem, because what happens is once people taste the joy of it, it just pulls them forward into it. Yeah. And I want to encourage you, make no mistake about it, it's a very challenging spiritual practice to get firm in your life, because there's so much pressure to work 7 days a week. But if you can get, I think, a theological framework for it, and resist the powers and principalities, and see yourself as offering a gift, not just for yourself, it's a gift to your church, and you're basically saying to the world out there, hey, we serve a higher power, which is our great illustration of B&H.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so actually what we've done at New Life recently, and you can catch this on newlifefellowship.org, Pete and I just had a conversation on frequently asked questions about the Sabbath. And our church, we're thinking about, we have actually invited our church to consider 1 or 2 days of keeping Sabbath together as a community, Friday night to Saturday night, or Saturday night into Sunday night. And so we've been experimenting, learning some new things here, and we found that as long as it's couched in, you don't have to keep the Sabbath. You get to keep it. Yes. It is a gift. It is a privilege. There's no two-tiered spirituality here, but it's a gift that God has for us. So what are some final words? People stop, rest, delight, contemplate, a candle to start the day there, to start the Sabbath. Yeah. What's just a final word here for folks that are scared to death of stopping?
Well, it has probably rightly been said that sometimes if we don't do it, God will do it for us, and he'll put us on our back, and he'll just stop us himself when we're out of control. And I think we're in this work because we love people, we love Christ, so we're all, in a sense, selfless giving out. And I think you deserve it. It's a gift. God knows that you were built for a rhythm. Your body and your spirit, your neurochemistry was built for a rhythm of working, paid and unpaid work, and Sabbath. Working and Sabbath. And that you will find, if you'll just trust God and begin to take some first steps, that you'll rewire the neurochemistry of your brain. And God will begin doing some healing of shame that says you're not worthy. I used to feel like if I have to get a Sabbath where I get the Sabbath, I get to be blessed and just receive from God. I got to work doubly hard to kill myself to deserve such a gift. And that was touching family of origin issues. And you're going to find that healing and things are going to happen inside of you. Like I think it's happened for me, and I think for you, and I think for so many others as we engage in Sabbath, that you are in for a wonderful surprise. And out of that, it'll be just so natural to give that out to other people.
Yeah. So for more information, we've done a lot of work on Sabbath keeping over the past, almost 15 years. So if you go to emotionallyhealthy.org, there are plenty of articles and sermons that we've done on it. You should also go to newlifefellowship.org as well, as we've journeyed as a church family throughout the years in Sabbath keeping. So our goal and our hope is that you practice Sabbath delight this year. So see you next time.
Thank you.